He was 32 years old, and there was no one left to fight. He stood at the edge of the known world, weeping. Not from sorrow, from hunger. There were no more kingdoms, no more kings, no more horizons to chase. And within months, the man who had never lost a battle would be dead in a stranger's bed. The official cause was fever, a long night of wine in Babylon, a sudden chill, 11 days of silence. But the soldiers who carried his body knew better. Something had been eating him long before the fever came. Something he had carried with him from Macedon, across Persia, into India, and back. You can conquer the world in 12 years. The world cannot conquer you back fast enough to matter. But the thing inside you can. To understand what killed Alexander, you have to start with the boy who was told every single day that he was already a god. The boy was raised in Pella, a rough mountain capital in northern Greece. His father was Philip II of Macedon, a one-eyed warrior king who had turned a broken kingdom into the most disciplined army in Europe. His mother was Olympias, fierce, religious, and reportedly devoted to snake-handling rituals in the dark. She told her son a secret, that his real father was not Philip, that his real father was Zeus. Whether she believed it or used it, it didn't matter. The boy believed her. He grew up reading Homer, sleeping with a dagger and a copy of the Iliad under his pillow. His tutor was Aristotle himself, the greatest mind in Greece, sent into the wilderness to shape a future king. Aristotle taught him philosophy, medicine, geography, and the limits of the known world. Alexander listened and quietly decided the limits were wrong. At 12, he tamed a horse no man could ride, a massive black stallion named Bucephalus, terrified of his own shadow. Alexander noticed it first. He turned the horse toward the sun, and the shadow vanished. His father wept watching him ride. "My son," Philip said, "Macedon is too small for you." It was meant as praise. It would become a prophecy. At 16, Alexander commanded his first army. At 18, he led the cavalry charge that crushed the combined armies of Greece. At 20, his father was dead. Philip was assassinated at a wedding, stabbed by one of his own bodyguards. The killer was cut down before he could speak. Some whispered Olympias was behind it. Some whispered the boy himself. No one whispered too loudly. Alexander took the throne at 20 years old, and the world began to burn. Greek cities revolted, expecting an easy fight against the young king. Thebes rose first, ancient and proud. Alexander marched on Thebes and destroyed it. The city that had stood for centuries was leveled in a single day. He spared only the temples and the house of a long-dead poet named Pindar. The message landed across Greece. The boy was not his father. The boy was something else. With Greece silenced behind him, he turned east, toward the empire no Greek had ever broken. The Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen. It stretched from Egypt to the edge of India. Its king was Darius III, ruler of millions, master of gold no Macedonian had ever counted. Alexander crossed the Hellespont in the spring with about 40,000 men. When his ship reached the Asian shore, he threw a spear into the sand. The land, he said, was already his. He had brought no supply train worth the name, no reserves, no way home. He had burned his own bridges on purpose. The army would eat what it conquered or it would starve. The first Persian army met him at the Granicus River. Cavalry on a muddy bank, arrows in the sky. Alexander led the charge himself, white plumes on his helmet, a target visible from a mile away. A Persian blade split his helmet open. He kept riding. By sundown, the Persian line had broken. The road into Asia Minor was open. Cities surrendered before he reached them. Some opened their gates and crowned him liberator. At Gordium, he was shown an ancient knot tied to a wagon. Legend said whoever untied it would rule Asia. Alexander studied it for a moment, drew his sword, and cut it in half. The story spread faster than his army. He was not playing by anyone's rules anymore. Darius came for him in person at Issus, a narrow plain by the sea, the Persian king with a force that dwarfed his own. Alexander aimed straight at Darius, cut through the line like a blade through cloth. Darius fled the battlefield in his chariot. He left behind his mother, his wife, and his daughters. Alexander treated them with extraordinary respect. He was many things, but he understood the power of a story. He pushed south next, into Phoenicia, into Egypt. The island fortress of Tyre refused to open its gates. He built a causeway from the mainland to the island. He took it stone by stone over 7 months. In Egypt, the priests crowned him pharaoh and son of the god Ammon. He walked into the desert oracle at Siwa, alone with the priests, and came out changed. What was said in that temple, no one ever fully knew. But after Siwa, he stopped calling himself Philip's son. He marched back into Persia for the final reckoning. Darius had rebuilt his army, hundreds of thousands strong, on the plain of Gaugamela. It was the largest battle Alexander would ever fight. He was outnumbered perhaps 5-1. He slept the night before so deeply his generals had to shake him awake at dawn. When asked how he could rest, he said the battle was already won in his mind. At Gaugamela, he tore Darius's army open with a single cavalry wedge. Darius fled again. This time, his own governors murdered him on the road. Alexander found the body in the dust. He covered it with his own cloak. The greatest empire on earth was his. He was 25 years old. He entered Babylon as a god-king. He entered Persepolis as a conqueror. In Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia, a fire broke out in the palace. Some say it was an accident. Some say it was revenge for Athens, burned a century before. Some say Alexander himself lit a torch during a long, drunken night. The greatest palace in the world burned for days. By morning, he was said to regret it. Regret would become a pattern. Here's where the story turns. Up to now, he had been a Greek king fighting Persians. After Persepolis, he started becoming something else. He began wearing Persian robes, Persian crowns. He kept Darius's court ceremonies alive. He asked his Macedonian soldiers to bow before him in the Persian way, forehead to the floor. For Greeks, you bowed only to gods. The men who had bled for him began to look at each other in silence. He told them he was no longer just their king. He was the king of Asia, the world's king. Some loved him for it. Some began to fear what he was becoming. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. When a man conquers everything, is he still the same man who started the march, or does the crown rewrite him into someone his own friends would not recognize? Was Alexander a liberator, a tyrant, or just a kid who never learned where to stop? Drop your honest answer in the comments. I read them. Now back to Babylon and the slow unraveling of a god. The conspiracies began in the camp. Whispers that the king had gone Persian, that he had forgotten Macedon. His closest friend from childhood, Philotas, was accused of knowing about a plot and saying nothing. Philotas was tortured and executed. His father, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, was killed on the king's orders soon after. The army watched and said nothing. The silence had a new flavor now. At a banquet in Samarkand, drunk and surrounded by flatterers, Alexander quarreled with Cletus the Black. Cletus had once saved his life at the Granicus. Cletus told him to his face that he was forgetting who he was. Alexander grabbed a spear and ran him through across the dinner table. When the wine wore off, he locked himself in his room for 3 days, refusing food, weeping for the friend he had killed. Then he stood up, washed his face, and ordered the army east. He pushed into the mountains of Bactria, then into the Hindu Kush, then into a country no Greek had ever marked on a map. In what is now Pakistan, he met King Porus at the Hydaspes River. Porus had war elephants. The Macedonian horses had never seen elephants. They panicked at the smell. Alexander crossed the river in a storm at night and attacked at dawn. He won, barely. When the captured king was brought before him, Alexander asked how he wished to be treated. Like a king, Porus said. Alexander gave him his kingdom back and added more to it. But Bucephalus, the horse he had ridden since he was 12, died in that battle. He buried his oldest friend in the mud of a foreign river and founded a city in his name. He wanted to keep going. India was vast. There were rivers no Greek had heard of, kings he had not yet beaten. His soldiers finally stopped. In the monsoon rain on the bank of a river called Deiphasis, the army refused to march another step. They had not seen their wives or children in 8 years. Their armor was rusted, their boots rotted off their feet. Alexander shut himself in his tent for 3 days, expecting them to beg. They did not. For the first time, the world's king was told no. He gave the order to turn back. He never forgave them for it. The march home went through the Gedrosian desert. He chose the hardest route on purpose. Some say it was punishment. Some say it was a last attempt to break the men who had broken him. Tens of thousands of soldiers and camp followers died in that desert, of thirst, of heat, of nothing. When the survivors finally reached Persia, the king who came out of the sand was not the same one who had marched in. He executed governors who had ruled badly in his absence. He mass-married his officers to Persian noblewomen at a single enormous ceremony. He was trying to fuse two worlds into one. His soldiers heard a king who had stopped listening. At Apis, the Macedonian veterans mutinied. They wanted to go home. They were tired of being told they were now Persians. Alexander stepped down from his throne, walked into the crowd, and pointed out the men he wanted arrested. They were executed on the spot. Then he gave a speech, weeping, calling them his brothers. By the end of the night, the mutineers were begging his forgiveness. He had that effect on men. He always had. His dearest friend in the world was a Macedonian noble named Hephaestion. They had grown up together, fought together, loved each other in a way the ancient world had a word for. Hephaestion died suddenly in Ecbatana, a fever, after a banquet, after a cup of wine. Alexander did not eat for days. He cut his hair short in mourning, like Achilles for Patroclus. He ordered the manes of every horse in the army shaved. He had the doctor who treated Hephaestion executed. Something in him went out with that grief and never came back. He returned to Babylon to plan his next campaign, Arabia, Carthage, the Western Mediterranean. He was 32 years old, and he was not done. The omens were bad. The Babylonian priests warned him not to enter the city from the west. He entered anyway. He had stopped believing anyone could tell him no. At a long banquet, he drank deeply. He went to bed with a fever. The fever did not break. For 11 days, he lay in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, the heart of the empire he had taken. His generals filed past his bed one by one. He could no longer speak. He raised a hand to acknowledge them. When they asked him to whom he left his empire, he is said to have whispered only, "To the strongest." It was, perhaps, the worst answer he could have given. He died in June, 323 years before the Common Era. Some say it was malaria. Some say typhoid. Some have whispered, ever since, that the wine in Babylon was poisoned. The truth is that the man had not slept properly in years. He had been wounded again and again. He had been grieving Hephaestion for months. He had been drinking like a man trying not to remember. The body finally caught up with the legend. His generals did not wait long. They were carving up his empire before the embalmers were finished with his body. His wife Roxana was pregnant. She gave birth to a son. Within years, both were murdered. His mother Olympias fought to protect the line and was killed for it. His half-brother, his sisters, his closest officers, almost all of them, dead within a generation. The empire he had built in 12 years shattered into 4, then more, then dust. This is the part of the story most people miss. He was not destroyed by Persia. He was not destroyed by India. No army on earth ever beat him. He was destroyed by the one thing he could not conquer and could not stop chasing: the next horizon. Every victory made the next one feel smaller. Every god he became left him hungrier than the man before. Ambition gave him the world. Ambition would not let him live inside it. And so he kept marching, kept drinking, kept burning friends and cities behind him, until there was nothing left in front and nothing left within. His body was hijacked on the way to Macedon and taken to Egypt. For centuries, his tomb in Alexandria was one of the great sights of the ancient world. Julius Caesar wept at it. Augustus visited it. Then, slowly, the tomb was lost. To this day, no one knows where Alexander the Great is buried. But you know his name. 300 years before Christ, 2,300 years before this video, and you know his name. He founded around 20 cities called Alexandria. One of them became the intellectual capital of the ancient world. He spread Greek language, Greek art, and Greek thought from Egypt to Afghanistan. The world he stitched together, the Hellenistic world, shaped everything that came after, including Rome, including us. Every conqueror since has measured himself against him in secret. Caesar, Napoleon, generals who never said his name out loud, but kept his story close. He is the reason the Great became a title at all. And maybe that is the final irony of Alexander. He wanted to be remembered as a god. He is remembered instead as a warning. A young man who could take the world and could not survive having it. If this story moved you, do me a small favor and hit that like button. It really does help the channel keep telling these stories. Subscribe if you want more rulers, more conquerors, more lives that burned this brightly and this briefly. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next into the dark? A Roman emperor? A Mongol Khan? A queen no one talks about enough? I'm reading. Some of you already know who's coming. Some of you have been asking for him for months. Next time, we ride east. Out of Greece, past Persia, past everything Alexander ever saw. To a boy born in a tent on the steppe who would build an empire even bigger than this one, and who, unlike Alexander, would live long enough to watch it grow. I'll see you there.